All right, Jeff King, Nick Brunacini. We're going to talk about Blue Card today. We talked about Blue Card last time when we were talking to Jeff, but we want to dig a little deeper, and we're out teaching on the road right now, and things always come up when we're teaching, and a lot of it is preconceived notions about what Blue Card is, what Blue Card isn't, who can adopt it, who can't, the resources necessary. So let's talk a little bit about that. So Jeff, what is your number one preconceived notion you get hit up with when we're talking on the road or anywhere about Blue Card?
The biggest one that I see, and again, we saw it again this week, and I thought it was fascinating, is that people think the program is really for departments of a particular size. So there are times when we're in areas that have more rural setting fire departments, and they think that Blue Card is something that is exclusive for your large metropolitan areas. Then you go out in the larger areas and they think, well, really, this is just for your smaller departments. It really won't work for something on our scale. And I think that dichotomy of the two is really interesting, because the reality is Blue Card is a command system that really transcends the size of your organization, and its applicability is universal. And that's what we try to get out as we're doing our classes.
We get well, we don't have palm trees. How is it going to work here if we don't have palm trees? Because a lot of the pictures were taken in Phoenix. We had a good explanation why that is. I mean, you were able to obtain them during the time that the Brunacinis were at Phoenix and through public information and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But we're trying to add to that to change it up. But just because the building or there's certain topography or you have a certain kind of tree outside doesn't mean that you can't use Blue Card.
Really, I'd like to say we were ahead of ourselves, because with the modern climate we have, is there will be palm trees everywhere sooner than later.
I believe that.
Yeah, Portland's ready for palm trees here.
It's been 90 degrees plus where I live in Minnesota for most of the summer, and that trend's going to continue. So I would believe that. The other thing is deployment. So even in the Blue Card program, there's a model deployment, so it gives you resources to work with, but this is scalable to whatever the deployment is within your department, correct?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so universal to so many departments, is that even though we're going to give you, this is what the deployment model is going to be for the particular evolution that we're going to run, if you're talking about implementation with your own organization, you would interject your deployment model for what that would be for your SIM. So you wouldn't run a 131 or a modified box and then fill it out if you send a full alarm on every one of your calls. You would just run the simulations with the full alarm. And those are the little modifications that you can make to make the program fit for what you're doing. But there's so much flexibility in Blue Card. I think people fail to see how it can fit because they're initially just so resistant to the idea of change.
So Houston, Texas, it works. Have there been departments where it legitimately cannot work that you've worked with, Nick, that in all the years since it started?
No, I'm not aware of any. I mean, it's really, sometimes we complicate things in the fire service. And the one thing that unites us is the fire. See, there's not a volunteer fire or a paid on-call fire or a urban fire. The fire doesn't give a shit how many people you have. So, and then you get into the standards with it. Well, really, when you look at NFPA 1710 and 1720, they recommend 17 for a 2-story, 2,000 square foot house fire. Well, the Blue Card response to that is 20 people. So it's only 3 more people in the thing. And that covers an urban area. Well, if you don't have that, then you're not going to send that number. If you only have 8 people on call, that's what you're going to get. So you're going to have to figure out what to do. Well, it becomes much more incumbent on you then to figure out the best use of your very limited deployment capability. So just, you're going to manage that a different way. So Blue Card is based off Fire Command. We took the IC's checklist from the back of each of the functions chapters, and we condensed those down into the eval sheets that we use for the IC1, IC2, and command team positions. So, and those are something that every fire department has to do that shows up to the scene of a fire, especially if they plan on conducting an offensive incident operation there. I mean, you're putting your firefighters in an IDLH hazard zone. See, and there's it's not only a command system, it's a safety system. So we call it a hazard zone management system. So you look at the way NIMS talks about 12 to 24-hour work periods. Well, Blue Card, because it manages work that takes place in an IDLH, we have a 15-minute work cycle. We don't have 12 hours. So that's going to cause us to do a little more, I don't know, micromanagement isn't probably the right word, but we've got to be a lot more deliberate and specific on what we're doing and keep track of that. So we use that system to make sure that everybody that went into an IDLH comes out of an IDLH. And that's really so any fire department that cares about that, I guess Blue Card would work for them. The places Blue Card works the best, or really at all, is when the leadership of the organization says we're going to do Blue Card. There's no stopping and starting. There's no fussing with it. So if it comes from the top, like anything else in a fire department, says this is what we're going to do, then that's what they do. And Blue Card is an excellent system to pick up and use to train your fire department and manage an IDLH hazard zones. I mean, it really is. That's why we're still here after 12 years or whatever it is.
So you're going to implement Blue Card. Who would be the first people from your department that you would send to class?
I think Nick hit on the biggest piece is you want the people at the top of the food chain to be involved in what's going on, and at least at most signing off on what's going on. I can speak to Houston because we were very, very lucky in what we had. We were able to involve an executive assistant chief in Richard Mann. We were able to involve an assistant chief in Kevin Alexander at the time. We were able to get involved a number of our deputy chiefs, a number of our district chiefs, some senior captains, and some captains. So we had every tested rank in our organization represented on our cadre of instructors. And then with that, our first rollout of the program was to get every officer in our program, from deputy chief to district chief to senior captain to captain, and then along with our incident command technicians, the engineer operators who drove our district chiefs, we brought them all as part of our first rollout of the program and got them involved with the certification process.
So I think what we're saying is if you skip the upper echelon, the 4 or 3 bugles, it's not going to go very well from our experience, right? I mean, if you don't have the chiefs on board, the people who are operational, it's going to be a struggle, because we're seeing people send their captains. It's like, where's your chiefs at, right?
You absolutely need organizational buy-in. And that's going to become, one, having influential people on your team of instructors. But more than anything else, Nick is 100% accurate. You have to have the full weight of your organization behind a program. And that includes having the fire chief come out and say, this is our incident command system. Because if you do not have that, if you do not have that backing, you will have waffling with the program. You will have some people who are actively engaged. You will have other people who are working adamantly against it. And that's just the nature of what happens if there's not that enforcement from the top down.
Yeah, that's I see that in places where they stop and start a lot. There's 2 captains and a battalion chief that have more operational clout and authority, I guess, than the people above them. Because you'll ask, well, what's the problem? They say, well, it's, these guys don't like it for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter. So they oppose it, and then, like you said, there's a small group over here that doesn't want to do it. There's another group over here that does, and it's like anything else in a fire department. If the top doesn't want to do it, it's not. You can screw around with it all day long. It's not going to get implemented, and that is sometimes. If that's the case, my advice is just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, why have the frustration? But the problem is you are a fire department, and you do have an obligation to be a fire department. And I mean, you have to protect your employees a certain way, you deliver a certain level of service. See, when we first started this, the big opposition to Blue Card is they thought it was some uber safety system that stopped effective action. So we couldn't show up to the scene until we did all these safety check dances and dance and fertility rites. That is just pure bullshit. A Blue Card incident operation will solve your incident problem for structural firefighting faster than one won't. Period. I'll put it up against anything, because what it does is it's based on the most effective action at the incident scene. Period. That's one of the things we hear about in places that did the old school attack from the unburned portion. Excellent stories. No, we can't do this. It's going to kill people. Well, once they implement it and see how effective it is those same people who wanted nothing to do with it now say, well, no, it's too effective and we're losing our capability and our edge of being seasoned, experienced firefighters because we're putting the fire out too quickly. We're not being punished and suffering enough. It's supposed to hurt. No, it's the faster you put it out, the better life is for everyone. That's what we're supposed to do. So
there's nothing about the Blue Card program that precludes you from being an aggressive firefighter. There's nothing about the system that stops you from doing anything. The system is predicated on keeping your firefighters safe, is getting the information right on the front end to make sure that what you're about to do matches up with what that event needs. And that's part of the beautiful thing of a critical factor-based system. But what I can tell you emphatically, I agree 100%. You have a district of people who are trained in the Blue Card system and they understand the critical factors, and they will be able to aggressively take care and mitigate that hazard as quick as anybody else. And when you see it happen, when you're seeing it take place in the fire ground, it's a wonderful thing to experience.
It's made us a more aggressive fire department. I'll tell you that.
At the end of when we started implementing it, you could see the effect it was starting to have, especially with younger officers, because it gave them great clarity. And the thing I was concerned about there, kind of towards the end of it, is I said, you would look at a building that we just put a fire out in, and you think, no, this should have burned down probably. I mean, they're going to haul the whole thing off, and it was a safe, well-run operation, but you stand back and you think, this is okie dokie. So it was like Jeff said, is if you want to be aggressive and this will allow you to do it quicker because you can marshal your resources exactly where you want them when you need them. See, in the old days, it was somebody shoot a gun. It was like a land rush. We would all race to the scene. And so if there were 6 companies, there were 6 incident action plans. You did Blue Card, there was one plan. So my experience in my own fire department when we did it is the shift commanders were responsible for setting up the command van. We were having a shift commanders meeting one day, and we got to talking about, we haven't set this command van up in like 3 months on B shift. They said, man, it's been a couple months on the other shift. And boom, boom, boom. And so we started, there was a computer there. We pulled up, activity and how many fires we had had and the rest. And we had had more fires over that several month period. And what it was is they were going out quicker. So we were using fewer resources. You didn't have to set the command van up because they put it out with the first 4 companies on the scene. We would do critiques after bigger fires. The comment that the senior staff made, so you'd have the fire chief and a couple assistant chiefs come to a bigger department critique, and they were active participants in it. And after a very short period of time, probably 6 or 7 months, where we were really putting people through the program and figuring out what we needed to do, is we did a critique, and the comment that both the fire chief and ops chief made is, we've been coming to these for a few years now. They said, this is the first time that we can remember where when we sat down at the critique, every firefighter that was in the room had been at the same fire. They said, before we started doing this, the people in the back were at a different fire than the people in the front, who were a different fire than the people at the roof, who were a different fire than the people inside. He says the whole thing was a shit sandwich. And he says, so we have these near-miss critiques. He says that's the reason why. So the other power of this is you get to sit down with the strategic officers, the tactical officers, and the task level officers in the same room and come to agreement on what you're going to do at the scene of a fire. That doesn't happen outside of a formalized hazard zone training program that I'm aware of. As I've heard stories that there are command staffs out there that do not know their Mayday procedures because they've never read them. Because they don't touch them because they don't do that. They're administrative folks. They do other things. So I mean, it's just
yeah, no. And there are organizations not only that have those standards, but maybe never exercise or train on those standards. And that's the biggest problem that you may have, is that you've got binders and binders of well-intentioned documents that lays out how your department is going to operate or function on the fire ground. And when you have a number of those that aren't being exercised on a regular basis, they're really just information you have to go back and reference at some point because it's not actionable when things go wrong on the fire ground. That's detrimental.
One of the complaints that we heard early on in our own fire department was that it was just too much training. How much more training are we going to do? And look at all, it's a certification you're looking at, and boom, 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 boom. Well, our training schedule was trimesters because we had, I don't know, between 600 and 700 people going through the program. We couldn't do it in a quarter, so we had to divide the year up into thirds. We figured out pretty quickly that the best schedule was Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And because we work 24-hour shifts, we have come to loathe afternoon training. It's not fun or efficient. It's much better to do morning training. You get a lot more out of it. So we would go from 8:30 to noon. Every 4 months, every officer would come in for a 4-hour training session. That was the schedule for Blue Card. So with that low of a time commitment, see, what you were doing is the last 90% of everything for us. Blue Card is the 90 to 100% we were always missing. So you had everybody in the room. You could say this, like an SOP you'd put up and say, well, this SOP. Well, the old people would say, that sucks for this reason. It got written for this reason. This is why we have it, and this is how we have to change it. The young people would say, well, we were confused by it because of this and this and this. Well, if you change that procedure, that's like taking a brick out of the wall, and it's going to affect the other ones. So you had a system where we could all come together, agree on the work, identify it, and then at the next incident, that's what you would critique as a chief. So the fire's over, and you say, okay, at the last CTC session, this is what we agreed on. They went, after about a year or two, the chiefs quit talking so much. The first in IC said, this is what I had, boom, 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 the fire went out. And, wow, that was pretty good. And the best thing I did was not taking command from you because you had it out when I got here. So it really united the organization on a bunch of different levels, filling in that little hole there that we had.
And sharing that information. And you look at organizations historically and the way the fire service has been managed, once you achieve those chief ranks and you got your white shirt and you got your cross bugles, there was a certain anointment that you had you had all the information to be a chief.
You were like a licensed doctor.
Absolutely. And most of this information came through you just by listening to the radio to other chiefs and then going out there and replicating what you heard. And it wasn't really about understanding why we're doing what we're doing. I will tell anybody who listens, I am a huge fan of Simon Sinek. I'm a huge fan of the Start With Why and making sure everybody understands. And what this has done, especially for departments with a lot of young officers and people who ride up in an officer capacity, is give them an understanding of why command decisions are being made. And that's a huge part of this implementation when you're rolling these programs out, is making sure they understand. And when you start to see these folks, understand what the IC is going through, what these division supervisors are having to account for. It makes them integrate into the system a little bit smoother.
You guys are from big departments, and I've always been in a department with under 200 people, but it's the same problems wherever you go. We had 3 different ways of doing things because the 3 shifts did things completely different. And when I became a strategic level boss, I only got to learn, because it was in 2001, 2002, by skidding my knees a bunch of times and really getting beat up and learning as I go. And then we go to Phoenix and we see the 3 strategic bosses on 3 different shifts, all talking the same, all saying the same things. They're all going to the same fires. And that was what was the most powerful thing that I saw. And from that moment on, it's like, whoever the strategic boss is on that shift needs to be the one who holds people accountable to it and needs to be the one who's training people to it, right?
The accountability piece is huge. The accountability piece is probably one of the most important. And I think that comes from being part of an organization that cares about your people. And I don't want to take it into, parents and children, but if you care about people, especially folks under your command, you want to hold them accountable to those things that are important to your organization. Because if you're not, what ends up happening is you have behaviors that you're normalizing things that you probably shouldn't be doing on the fire ground. And by doing so, you're condoning actions that aren't necessarily in the best interest of firefighter safety. So you have to have accountability. If you're going to introduce a program, you've got to hold people accountable to the program. If you're going to put information in a guideline, whether it's a Mayday guideline or whatever it happens to be, you have to hold people accountable to that guideline, because that's the only way you're going to ensure that everybody is complying with what's going on. I think you talk about it in one of the very first podcast episodes when you've got Don Abbott and then the follow-up you have with Josh. You have to hold folks accountable. If you don't, it's going to run haywire and nothing is going to work. You might as well not engage if you're not going to hold folks to a standard that you establish.
I owe our people a round trip ticket.
Absolutely.
Not only to incidents, but to their careers and everything else. So if I can't provide them every opportunity to get a round trip ticket, they come into the service, out of the service in relatively the same shape, at least so they can enjoy their post-service career.
That's the most elegant way to say it. You owe them a round trip ticket from the day they come to you as a cadet to the day they walk out on their retirement. They're coming in and they're going out with the same health as they were when they started. And that's what you want for every firefighter. You want them to be able to walk out happy, healthy, and safe at the end of their career.
Well, and to kind of follow up on that is Blue Card is the result of Southwest supermarkets, right? And, Phoenix Fire Department and our Brett Tarver dying in the line of duty. So we go through this recovery process, and there were different committees that looked at different things. Well, one of the things that became apparent, and Vance talked about it a few minutes ago, is he had 3 different fire departments. Well, we had 24 because we had 8 battalions across 3 shifts. So we had 24 different BCs. And early in my career, we went away from a shift commander-based organization to one with district commanders. And it was because of growth and a lot of other things that we couldn't catch up with. So it was an excellent model to manage the administrative requirements of a fire department. But the problem is you had deputy chiefs who were on staff. They weren't working a shift, so they took turns pulling the duty. Well, most of them had become deputy chiefs because they had some other skill. So they took a chief's test because they were a company officer and they needed to promote to, instead of managing fire station repair, they needed to manage fire station construction and new stations. So they tell the captain, take the chief's test, boom. Well, most of the chiefs in my department that were hand-picked were picked for those administrative roles. They would show up, take the chief's test. They get promoted because you need them to run that part of the organization. What happened, or where the leftovers at the bottom of the list went, is to the field, because we were so well trained and the rest and yada, yada, yada. And, that's just where you've sent them. Well, what that generated was the BCs ended up knowing more about incident command and managing fires than their bosses did, because they hadn't been doing it for 10 or 15 years. Some of them hadn't been doing it for 20. So if they had a question, they'd come in and ask the BC. Well, it was all over the page. So you had some battalions that were great and others that were horrible, and I mean, everything in between. So one of the things we recognized early on is if we want to change the organization, and what's going on here is we need to change the way that we're staffed in the thing, and you need to put deputies back into operations. See, and then you get issues with the union in there, where the union wants to have the captains right up in the BC position for the overtime. So if you can't fill it for the BCs, then the union does it. You think, well, no, that would be like, oh, okay, we're going to do the same with paramedics. We don't need a real paramedic. Well, but send Jimmy over. It's his turn to constant staff. Oh, okay. What the hell? So that was part of the change, is they put shift commanders back in. And that is when, so now you had an operational deputy who all the BCs reported to. Well, you had two of them on each shift. I mean, Phoenix was big enough. So that was, in my mind, that was a huge deal. So the three people that you talk about that had the same common, similar message, they did that because they worked together out of the same place. They created the content together, and then we relieved one another. So it was a hug and a kiss as far as that went. It really was. In fact, we were working hard to put like shift commanders, battalion chiefs, safety officers into the regular union as sworn members again. Yeah, we were becoming anarchists. It was doomed to fail, that plan, but you know what the hell? It was fun thinking about it.
I think the other thing it does for a department, and I've always said this, is it makes you operationally focused. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down on fire truck color, and let's design new patches, and what's our badge look like, all the shiny penny stuff, right? And wherever we've done blue card, and I've been in two different departments now with a lot of mutual aid partners, you become operationally focused. You leave all the other crap behind that really Mrs. Smith doesn't get any benefit out of, and you're bringing to the table things that Mrs. Smith gets a benefit out of, such as quickly extinguishing fires and providing the best possible service we can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and we still had a patch. In Phoenix, we never got rid of the patch.
Yeah.
We had bagpipers. They showed up. You had some of everything. It didn't change us that way. You still had all the lunatics you had. It was a tremendous place to work.
But instead of, and I guess my point is when you're sitting around the kitchen table or on the tailboard, guys started talking about fires. They weren't focused on other things because we gave them a platform and a real basis, or a what do you call it? A baseline. Yeah, we gave them a baseline. Like, this is where we're starting at. And then everyone was on the same page with that. And then we could talk up and get more complicated as we needed to.
Well, and look at it. Look at the way we train ourselves in the fire service. Every service we provide hooks up to a very good, formalized, vetted, certification-based training program. The EMS side of things, that's standing orders from the medical community. That's the reason we can deliver the mail in EMS. Hazmat, it's chemistry. What happens when you mix this with that? You've got to be certified to be a level A member of a level A hazmat team. Same with TRT. Certification-based deal. Before I retired, my fire department started installing car seats. They sent the people they picked to do that to a 2-week certification-based car seat class. You know how much training and certification and education a BC had to have to manage a 5-alarm fire in a high-rise building? 0. Yeah, so there you go. That's,
I think that reference to the EMS model. EMS will change their actions on a dime. When you look at what happens with the larger medical community and they come back and say, originally early on in the days when you were talking about CPR, it was opening up that airway, making sure you had a patent airway, clearing it, getting your breaths in and starting your compressions. And then all of a sudden, just on a dime, they just say, look, this is going to be a compression-based system. You get in and you immediately go to compressions on somebody. The fire service didn't balk. We just did what they said do, because you have people in a position that are continuing to look at this, find the best practice, and find ways to keep the people that we were serving healthy and safe. So to have people who take exception to changing things on the fire side, seems a little odd to me because they're the same ones who willingly go along with whatever EMS tells them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as EMS has changed with science and everything else, we've changed because of science, and the environment that we're doing our work in has changed tremendously since 1990. Since I've been studying.
Science has had a huge impact on what we're doing, but it's one of the things we kind of dance around right now as an industry is that we look at the political landscape and we have a lot of people across the board who deny science. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a virus or you're talking about anything else or what anyone's doing in regards to understanding modern fire dynamics. You have people who will just naturally want to resist what scientists tell them. And if I didn't experience for myself, then I don't believe it to be true.
Well, and then you mix that with the culture. Most of the firefighters I worked with that had tattoos after they became firefighters, they tattooed axes and nozzles and fire and helmets and halogen bars and things like that on their bodies. None of them did like a laryngoscope or an IV needle.
Star of Life on your back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Or a fire prevention form. Or say nobody freelances to lay a supply line or throw a salvage cover. We freelance to get some. That's who we are. So
I've never seen a nurse with a tramp stamp of the Star of Life. That would be pretty interesting. But.
Oh, that would be. Well, AED pads tattooed on your chest.
It's just not the well, yeah. We can go into all the psychoanalysis why that doesn't happen, but
that might be a completely different episode.
We need to get into
we may
that
need
some
to,
other
and
time.
we may need to get Tim Dietz in.
Yes. You can help us all through it.
Stations of compassion.
Well, the other thing I think you guys started hitting on, this is a perishable skill too.
Absolutely.
That if you get certified in it, it doesn't mean it's good forever, just like EMS or anything else, right?
The one and done model for training doesn't work. And this is a 100% perishable skill set. And you do your online training and it gives you that cognitive understanding of what the program is. And then you get into the manipulative learning that you go through in the certification lab and the 24 hours where you work through the 5 occupancies. But the reality is if you don't come back and revisit, you're going to lose the skill set. So you have to find ways to reintegrate this information into training programs. It's not just enough to introduce it the one time. You've got to find ways to engage this in your continuing education program. If you have the opportunity to introduce some of this information into your promotional process, because that's the time when you really have all the people that are seeking advancement in your organization for them to latch on to the same sort of training material. So that is another opportunity for you to add things. As people promote, continue to show it to them again and again. If you expect somebody to go through any training, and I don't care what it is, one time and expect proficiency, you're not going to get it. Professionalism comes with practice. We've got to do it over and over again. One time won't get us there.
And I think our model provides for that ongoing education so we can keep up on it. Because some of us run a lot of fires and some of us don't, right? I mean, if you went 3 years and you didn't command a fire, you better revalidate those skills, right?
Absolutely. And, we run fires like a lot of people run fishing trips. And a lot of the fires we make are a lot bigger than they probably were when we were on scene and dealing with them. But nobody is making or responding to the number of fires that probably happened 20, 30 years ago. There's a lot of things technology-wise that are really helping the community and retarding some of the fire growth that we're having. But that doesn't mean we still don't need exposure. We have to keep our people training for the day that they're going to run it, even if they're only making a couple of fires a week or, in a system like ours where you have people who are responding to probably a few more fires in the city of Houston than some other places. They still need the training. They still need the opportunity to practice. They need to perfect their skill set, and it doesn't happen on the job anymore. We just have to make up for it in the classroom.
As we talked about last time we talked to you, Jeff, that this program continues to evolve. What do you think right now? What are the things keeping you up at night on the evolution? Where are we going next? What are the next big things that we need to hit?
What we're talking about right now, the back end piece, and helping organizations and helping those people that become incident commanders find ways to continue to go with that training process. A big piece of the Blue Card program as an IC is that recertification every 3 years. There's continuing education that we want to continue to ramp up and add more value for our customers to go through. But more importantly, we want to be able to provide them avenues to continue the IC evaluation process that they may not be getting outside. And I think that's going to be a huge piece for us moving forward, is to find ways to allow individuals to stay with the program by offering them opportunities to evaluate and do those checkoffs within their 3 years. Because the reality is the fire service is filled with organizations who still embrace one and done.
Yep.
And it's just not an acceptable model.
And pencil whipping.
Absolutely. The one and done, the pencil whipping, it scares me to death, to be completely honest with you, because what you're going to find is, hey, we checked a box, we went on about our business, and then we revisited the exact same. You look at the NIOSH reports, you go through these line of duty deaths, and you just feel for the folks that are out in the field that are out there conducting these, because they're seeing the same things over and over. The fire service isn't finding new ways to hurt or kill firefighters. We're doing the same things. We're not learning from our mistakes. We're not trying to get better. We adjust at one time, we check the box, we're better. And then 10 years later, you see a result. It has the same things listed again. And to me, that is unacceptable. When you look at, and I will say it with Nick sitting here, one of the things that I admire most about that department, about Phoenix, is how they responded to the Brett Tarver fire. We as an organization, we as the fire service do a great job of memorializing the lost. We're really good at it. We're good at cleaning up our apparatus. We're good at getting in line, putting our Class A's, and we're good at marching behind. But you honor somebody by not revisiting that path again. And Phoenix spent 6 years looking at all the systems integrated with what happened with the Tarver fire to come up with the answers to ensure that they never had another loss like that again. That's honoring Brett Tarver.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at my department, probably a lot of other departments, everything that I've learned from NIOSH reports through Blue Card, etc., has a line of duty death tied to it. And that's how we honor those people. So whether it's Keokuk, Iowa, Coos Bay, Oregon, Hackensack, New Jersey, all of those, we talk about them on a Coleraine Township. I talk about them on a regular basis, and there's a practice that we have within our department because of those. And, the biggest thing's Blue Card. Blue Card prevents a lot of it, but, there's a little other things that we tweak to make sure it doesn't happen. And we owe it to those people. That's the ultimate memorializing, is not to let that repeat again, because they gave their life for us to learn a lesson.
We have to own the losses, and we can't defer accountability. We have to own the losses. We have to recognize that if a loss happens in a city, in a department that may not be associated with our own, but those are our brothers and sisters, and those losses could very well be ours. But we hide behind this idea that it hasn't happened to me, that it hasn't occurred to me, that it wouldn't take place in my district or my battalion with my firefighters. And the reality is that shouldn't be the argument. The reality when we show up on scene is that this could be the one. And we need to manage it with the idea that, like you said early on in this event, I'm going to manage this fire with a round trip ticket. I want them coming to this scene, and I want them all going back to their station when the fire is over. Because if we're just managing it with that aggression of going forward, and we don't have the plan for when it's over, then I think that sets us up for the opportunity to have more injuries and losses down the line.
Well, firefighting is a low frequency, high risk endeavor, right? It really is. Well, so you need to prepare yourself for it, like other occupations that do that. So like the transportation industry and airplane pilots. Nobody knows how to fly an airplane any better than a commercial airplane pilot. I flew out here on Delta. They keep their pilots at a very high level. Periodically, what is it, once a year or twice a year? Based on hours,
they get pulled out.
And they have to do Flight Simulator CE. Now, these pilots are experts. That's what they do 8 hours a day, every day. And then they said, no, now you're going to come, and it's the airplane that you fly, and we're going to make sure that you know what to do when unexpected things happens. I had a buddy who's blue card guy. His wife was a pilot, a commercial pilot. The big checklist thing, checklist. He's talking to her about checklist. And she says, yeah, we do a checklist before we take off. And he says, yeah, and if there's an emergency, she says, listen, asshole. She says, I don't use a checklist to fly the plane. Once we go through the checklist, then I fly the plane. If something happens, you go through a checklist in your memory. That's what we do. That's just, it was interesting. So it was kind of actualized it. Well, when we started doing this in Phoenix, you could see the effect of it pretty quickly. I mean, within weeks of companies that went through and what didn't. And you could tell the difference between somebody that had been through it and someone who hadn't in about 2 seconds. So at the time, we knew, the group of us said, we can't stop doing this. I mean, and really, okay, so we're busy. We teach 4 hours a week, each of us, woohoo. For the investment of time, it was just enormous. I mean, it paid triple what we put into it at the end. And the other thing it did is, you talked about this earlier, is it knocked a bunch of the nonsense out of our relationships with each other. Everybody kind of saw what we were together to do the same thing. We just had different roles in accomplishing that. That's the way firefighters work. We come together as companies. So it was more mellow. I mean, everything was a little more relaxed in operations. Everybody got along a little bit better. There wasn't as much trauma between the ranks and things. You still had fun with stations doing things and shifts to each other, but that was easy to manage. So,
but you will acknowledge that one of the things that made it incredibly successful is what you're talking about right now, is that the people that were delivering the training were also out in the field walking the walk. You weren't delivering the training and then turning around and performing and acting in a different capacity. There was authenticity to your words because you did what you said to do.
Yeah, and it kind of put us into the unwashed masses too. I mean, you could see it. We were dressed the same. We wore brush pants, blue. And there was a little polarization between the white shirts and us then. It's like, oh no, but there was harmony with 98% of the rest of the fire department, which overwhelmed it all. So there again, effective leadership, we all get along. You take that top person out and you start to bicker, and there's not that adult presence at the top, boom, then we start playing in our own shit.
And I think that's one of the, and talking about implementation and accountability with the program, but I think that's one of those things that are unspoken in the fire service, is that what you're talking about is having from the top down, everybody holding each other accountable. And the unintended consequence was how much better everybody got along with each other because there was consistency and continuity. And I think more than anything else, the members of the fire service, not only do you find them starving for leadership, but they just want it to be consistent. They want the same thing when they come to work. They don't want to have to worry about what somebody's personality or who I'm working with this day or what this person wants. You provided them stability in a job that is really centered around so many unstable things.
Standard conditions, standard action, standard outcomes really became a mantra for the organizations that I've been involved with, to the point that it standardized everything. I mean, there was no more A shift has this hose load and they rebed it on B shift, or the compartments were different on the engines. My department now has 7 engines and 3 ladders. They're all set up the same. They are all exactly the same. You go to the engineer's compartment. I, as the chief, can go to the engineer's compartment and know exactly what's going to be in there, and no one screws with it, because we want the system that's going to work at 3:00 in the morning, and we want it to be standard. And Blue Card has shown us that way, even though, the way you set up your engine has nothing really to do with Blue Card for the most part. Having that mentality has helped us just become standard across the board.
That is something that I think every organization should aspire to, and I don't think it really matters on the size of your department. Having those standard conditions, each apparatus laid out the same. When you have organizations that have committees for gear or apparatus, and those committees turn over and change, and as a result of those turnovers and change, you have new apparatus and new gear, and all kinds of things continue to revolve down the line. The reality is what that creates is more instability because there is not consistency. You should be able to, as a driver in a system, go to whatever engine you go to, and you would like to be able to say, I'm going to get in this apparatus, and if I need to pull this appliance, I know it's in this compartment. And the truth is, there are plenty of departments who do not operate in anything close to that fashion.
Well, again, go back to the different services we provide. You can be a paramedic in New York City or in Los Angeles, California. Doesn't matter. You're doing the same thing. It's a national registry now. We don't have that for the fire service.
You mean the water's not different?
No.
It doesn't have different extinguishing properties depending on where you're at?
When the science first came out, people said, no, that doesn't burn like that here. Oh, okay. The physics is different and you're part of the earth. Yeah, okay.
The fire doesn't go to fire school. It doesn't learn how to burn. It doesn't learn how to consume fuel. It doesn't learn how to move through a structure. Its properties and how it behaves are based on physics. And it's going to do the same thing everywhere across the country. And how we can attack it and deal with it are part of those standard actions that we can apply. And, we're very lucky. We're in a great time in the fire service. We're almost in a bit of a renaissance where there's so much more information validating what we've done and continuing to talk about where we can go. It's just really an excellent time to be a firefighter if you're in a system that looks at and appreciates that opportunity to evolve and get better.
It's an excellent time to also be retired.
Yes, it is.
It's just a great career all around. You work your time, and then they pay you for not coming. I mean, it couldn't be more fantastic.
You got your round trip ticket, and it is our hope that we can help people all across this country get their round trip tickets.
Mine too. That's the goal of Blue Card, is for all of us to abuse the pension system to the very nth degree.
Hear, hear.
Provide the highest level of service we can to the communities we protect, and then right off into the sunset and something that gets horrible MPG and eat saturated fats until the cows come home.
And that wraps up this edition of Bee Shifter. I'd like to thank Jeff King for hanging out with us today. If you'd like to contact Jeff, you can get his contact information in the show notes, and he'd be happy to answer any questions about Blue Card implementation or really anything to do with, getting Blue Card going in a large department and some of the lessons learned that he's had with the Houston Fire Department. If you like this episode, please subscribe and make sure to tell a friend. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars or thumbs up or a 5, whatever they want. But it kind of helps us out. And if you have any comments for me, I'd be happy to see them as well. My contact information is once again in the show notes. Until next time, thanks for listening to Bee Shifter. Please be safe.